place. And on behalf of our organization and our co-sponsoring organization today, which is the Michael and Barbara Newmark Institute for Human Relations at the Jewish Community Relations Council, we want to welcome you to honor and remember the work, impact, and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's really an honor for me to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker, Senator Brian Williams. Senator Williams was elected to the Missouri Senate in 2018 and represents the 14th Senatorial District in St. Louis County. He grew up in Ferguson, Missouri, and is currently the first Black male in 2 decades to serve in the Missouri Senate. Studying government and public health policy led Senator Williams to pursue a career in public service. And after graduating, he went on to work for several years in the U.S. Congress as a congressional staffer, where he oversaw the rollout of the Affordable Care Act marketplace in Missouri as a congressional ACA coordinator. Senator Williams also served as a board director for People's Health Center, where he helped develop a behavioral health care center for children in underserved communities, and on the boards of Simmons Bank, iHeartMedia, St. Louis Crisis Nursery, and the Nurses for Newborn Sport. So he is a busy man, and we are so delighted that he has taken the time today to share his remarks with us and that you're here to join us. So, Senator Williams, we're so happy to meet you and to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. And first, I want to take a second to thank the Merowitz Center for helping organize today's event, honoring Dr. King, as well as reflecting on his message. And also, good afternoon to all of you. It's really interesting as I prepare for my remarks. I just got back to St. Louis. As you know, we're Jefferson City during the week for the legislative session. So we were very fortunate to get done early enough today to where I was able to get back in St. Louis in time and do it from home and not the Capitol. Being gone 4 or 5 days a week, today I would rather be at home and be close to family and all of you than be in the Capitol. But again, it's really good to be here with all of you. 55 years ago, Dr. King wrote his final book, and it was titled, "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" Now, that's a question I think is more relevant today as it was 5 decades ago. We find ourselves now at a time when a pandemic has become the new normal. And we've also have seen that our nation is deeply divided. And young people are questioning if the American dream is still within their reach or if it is a relic of a bygone era. Facing these challenges and more, I find ourselves asking the question, where do we go from here? And then I think about my upbringing. As a young man, my mother and my grandmother, they always taught me that if I saw problems in the world, I had a responsibility to do my part to fix what I could and fix it where I could. So now, serving in the Missouri State Senate, I strive to meet that purpose every single day. In the Missouri Capitol, I stand on the shoulders of many giants and continuing the good work of those that came before me. I think about former senators like T.D. Ted McNeil. Ted McNeil was a civil rights leader in St. Louis in the 1930s and 40s. Now, he had to come up the hard way, working as a sleeping car attendant with the railroad and as a leader with his labor union. During World War II, McNeil was the president of the St. Louis branch of the March on Washington movement. As you remember, for those who can remember, this movement was dedicated to making sure that Black Americans were able to obtain good jobs in the manufacturing industry that was in full swing during the war. And then also in the summer of 1942, McNeil led 400 members as they marched on St. Louis factories to protest the lack of training for Black Missourians. the lack of jobs for Black women, and lack of advancement for Black workers. And then later that summer, McNeil and the March on Washington movement held a rally for workers in addressing their rights in St. Louis. Now, there was about more than 9,000 people that showed up. And when I think about it, that's not chaos. That's what we would call community. And it worked. So by 1943, there was more than 250 defense-related manufacturers in the city of St. Louis, and they had started hiring Black workers. The Missouri Historical Society estimates that McNeil and his organization were responsible for obtaining 15,000 jobs for Black St. Louisans during World War II, 2 decades before the Civil Rights Act. But he didn't stop there. In 1960, McNeil was elected the first Black person in the Missouri State Senate. You know, it was said that when Ted took the floor in the Senate, everyone stopped and all attention was on him. You know, he would go on to become the first Black man to serve on the board of curators of the University of Missouri. He also became the first Black man to serve as a president of the Board of Police Commissioners for the city of St. Louis. Now, Senator McNeil also blazed a trail for others to follow, and others did. You know, I think about in 1962, Deverne Calloway, who was elected as the first Black woman to the Missouri House of Representatives. Or in 1977, Senator Gwen Giles was the first Black woman to serve in the Missouri State Senate. And then in the decades that followed, Black men and women continued to serve in both chambers of the Missouri legislature. Thinking back to the words of Dr. King, I wouldn't call that chaos. It's very clear that that's community. So I know that when I stand on the Missouri State Senate floor, in that same chamber where Ted McNeil stood 60 years ago, I stand on the shoulders of giants. So I have to stand tall, as my grandmother says, because the work endures. And you know, the ugly truth is there's still racism in our society. There's still discrimination against Black Missourians. And there's still things that we can do, elected officials can do, to help bend our moral arc towards justice. Last year, we passed historic comprehensive police reform. And with this legislation that I filed and passed that went to the governor's desk, we banned things like police chokeholds. We gave new authority to local prosecutors to free people wrongfully imprisoned, a monumental step forward towards freeing innocent men like Lamar Johnson. And we were fortunate to free Kevin Strickland in Kansas City. We also funded diversity training and de-escalation tactics for law enforcement. And then we made huge investments in job training in mental health services and housing. We put historic funding towards lifting up crumbling schools and making sure that every student, and when I say every student, I mean every single student, get the education they need to succeed. But the work still endures. Together, our job is not done. There's still too much violence in our streets today. Illness and disease still haunt our communities. And there's still people out there who are armed with lies, armed with weapons, and want to attack our democracy. Now, the world is presenting us with chaos, but I believe we can still choose community. We can still look to the better angels of our nature and work towards a brighter future. And as we do, we ask ourselves the question, you know, the question posed by Dr. King more than 50 years ago: where do we go from here? In search of answers, I turn to the words of a famous Black author named James Baldwin, who said, "Know from whence you came. If you know from whence you came, there's absolutely no limitations to where you can go." Baldwin stood with Dr. King at the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 when Dr. King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech. And Baldwin knew that an honest and unabashed acknowledgement of the past was the only way to move towards the future. To know where we are going, we must know from whence we came. We must know our history in order to build our future. A future where our communities, our families, and our young people have, as what James Baldwin said, no limitations to where they can go. We know from whence we came, and we know the journey is not yet done. So where do we go from here? We go forward. Better schools, safer streets, healthier communities, and a democracy that protects our sacred right to vote. That's why I'm working every single day in the Missouri Senate. And that's why it's truly an honor to be there for every single one of you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to address the importance of Dr. King's legacy. May God bless you all. And let's do one thing. Let's keep it going forward. Thank you so much.
If we have questions, you can raise your hand or you can chat. We have got a couple of things in the chat box. We have good afternoon, everyone. It says I'm honored to attend this meeting on behalf of the Office of Congresswoman Cori Bush. Excited to hear from Senator Williams. And I think that's all the questions or comments in the chat at this time. Do we have other questions? I'm not seeing anything at the moment. Yes, Cheryl. Yes, Cheryl.
This is Cheryl Adelstein. I want to say good afternoon to Senator Williams and let him know I have already made my first trip to Jefferson City this week. I spent some fun time there on Tuesday, and I'm just wondering if he'd like to share with us what committees he sits on that may have been mentioned and what he's going to be hearing in the next couple weeks in terms of legislation that we should be looking out for.
Yeah, Cheryl, good to see you, and thank you for the work that you do with the JCRC. I'm proud to call you guys a partner, and I'm grateful for all the great work we've been able to do together since I've been in the Senate. Right now in the Senate, it's a very interesting time. What we've run into now is that there's been the extreme arm of the Republican Party has created some infighting with what you would consider the more moderate Republicans. So as a Democrat, I've been kind of enjoying sitting on the sideline, not really focusing on draconian policies that really impact our state. But there are some things that we are focused on that I think is extremely important. And I think it's really important that it's on the radar of listeners. One, for those who are aware, our state has received an unprecedented amount of funding from the federal government, roughly in the sum of $7 billion. And we've been focused on ensuring that we identify transformative and once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to be able to steer investments, in particular towards the St. Louis region, and in communities and parts of the region that has been underserved and underrepresented. So my office has been working very close. I serve on the Appropriations Committee to focus on how do we leverage that funding towards transformative and once-in-a-lifetime projects. So that's one of our priorities. Just to go a little further in detail on something that we're doing. We're working now with the University of Missouri St. Louis to acquire roughly 36 acres, which is their South Campus. They're now moving their students to the North Campus, and that would provide an opportunity for an area that has been deemed as a food desert to potentially get a grocery store. There's not a healthcare facility within that part of the region, which we can look at an outpatient healthcare facility, and then to think that it's right off a public transit line, which is the Metro Link. in a dense part of the region that's not landlocked, and then still have an anchor like UMSL to be able to be a partner there. So right now we're working to create a shared funding model with the state and local government to do matching funds to get that land site ready for development, and hope to create a public-private partnership. Another thing that we're focused on as well is last year I passed historic legislation that was focused around criminal justice reform. As I stated in my remarks, we were able to address things around police accountability, but we also changed the expungement law. Prior to my legislation passing, for a nonviolent offense, a felony, you would have to wait 7 years after being off of supervised release to be eligible for an expungement. We lowered that to 3 years. And for a misdemeanor nonviolent offense in the state of Missouri, it would be 3 years after being removed from supervised release. We lowered that to 1 year. So what we're doing now is we filed legislation to be able to essentially remove the cap in terms of the number of expungements that someone can receive. And this is important because if someone may have had a, and let's be clear about this, everyone makes mistakes. And if they've learned from those mistakes, they shouldn't follow them for the rest of their lives. So if you had an encounter with law enforcement and you received 3 charges, by the law today, they would be considered 3 separate expungements. Under the bill that we filed this year, it would be considered under the scope of 1 expungement because it was 1 encounter. It would also make it to where the judge has discretion when it comes to the petition filing fee, which is $200. So if someone is deemed unable to pay that cost, it would be waived. And then we also would create a central database, which would allow attorneys to be able to go to 1 database and have access to the records. My Senate district, for example, has 36 municipalities. So that means if someone within a 22-mile radius was to get a citation or be arrested, they may not remember what the arresting agency was, or it may have happened when they were in college or a teenager. We just don't know. So to streamline that and make it easier for folks to get expungement, we want that database to be there. So that's a piece of legislation that I'm focused on this year to get across the finish line. We're also going to be looking at protecting voting rights, ensuring that there's no legislation to infringe on that, like voter ID. Clearly remaining committed to advocating against anything that may infringe on reproductive health rights. And then, of course, really watching this redistricting process, as you know, to ensure there's no gerrymandering, to maintain the identities within the Constitution of legislative and congressional boundaries. So, I don't anticipate this being a session, Cheryl, that we get a lot done in terms of legislation due to the fact that it is an election year. But I do know that there will be a lot of rhetoric that will come out that would pose fear to a lot of folks in the state. But I don't anticipate much of it passing through the Senate. And for those that are familiar with me, I am prepared and ready to do everything I can to defend democracy and ensure that everyone in our state can vote. Women have access to proper health care, and also making sure that we utilize this funding to take our region to the next level and essentially put it in a position where it's better off than it was prior to the pandemic.
Terry Bloomberg has a question.
Yes, thank you, Senator Williams, for the job that you did this previous year. You mentioned today from whence we came, knowing our history. I'm aware that there have to be several bills around critical race theory. And I know you will do your best to oppose those, but it is so important that our history be taught.
Yeah, when you think about, and one, good to see you, Terry. Thank you so much for that question. When you think about things like critical race theory, let's be clear, these are not taught in in our elementary schools or really in any of our schools in the state. So first, we need to make sure that we clear that up and not allow that myth to move forward. But when you think about critical race theory, you know, it's a bigger thing to it. I mean, right now it's creating the thought and the theory that we should erase history. And that goes back to, you know, just thinking about discrimination as a whole. You know, I think about the time that I spent in Israel and being in a kibbutz steps away from the green line, and to think that just over in Israel, folks live in an environment where they could be under attack by rockets or anything daily. And that is just an example of how our history has tended to be put on the sideline to give folks the opportunity to infringe and ultimately create opportunities of discrimination when it comes to our democracy.
We have
So
a,
yes, I will be fighting against CRT and any other crap like that.
we have a comment or question in the chat box, and then Phyllis, I will get to you next, and Harvey as well. The chat box, Susan says, what do you think MLK would be most proud of to see, and what would be most disappointed by?
Oh, that's a great question. Susan, thank you for that question. I would probably say Dr. King would be most proud of, I believe our country has made tremendous progress in terms of acknowledging some of the racial inequities. I mean, I think about the fact that when I took on police reform last year, it was simply from a space of this isn't an us versus them situation when it comes to law enforcement. It was about tackling a subculture of bad police officers. And it simply stemmed from the fact that George Floyd could have easily been me. So to see that an issue like that has been brought to the forefront and hope to be able to create safer communities is really, that's really something I think Dr. King would be proud of. What I think he would be disappointed about is really, we've watched democracy get to a place where there has been so much false information put out there to put fear in our country, where we have really gotten away from that history and understanding who and where our allies are, where we have allowed people to use tools to really infringe on democracy, which has led to you know, so many different attacks, whether it's on our voting rights, whether it's attacks on religion, whether it's attacks on folks' race, and even go even further, you know, as I think about my mom, who I'm very close with, the attack on women's reproductive health rights. So I think he would be very disappointed by that. I think this is an opportunity, considering that we've gotten past the last presidential administration, to really figure out how do we move forward and really put our country on a trajectory to really move in a direction where we're centered around love and not hate.
So Harvey, you had a question, I believe, and you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Wow, Senator Wilson, thank you so much, Williams. Thank you so much for your comments. The idea that people are against CR, critical race theory, being taught, and our history, much of it disgusting, but present, and not being told to our children so we can avoid those things is just reprehensible and disgusting. And we really, really enjoy your words. The question I had, and you mentioned that you were working on equal education. I attempted as a citizen to lobby in Jeff City for a couple of years, really intensely on 1 year, and in St. Louis, because the ratio of students to teachers is so different in the St. Louis City and in some of the communities in North County. And it's appalling. Education is so important to success of our children and future generations. And I wonder, what, if anything, are you doing? And what is the plan to attempt to see that children are indeed given free and equal public education? The word equal, when a ratio in Clayton may be 12 students to a teacher, and in St. Louis City, the ratio may be 36 students to a teacher, I find appalling and very needful attention. So I'm asking,
Absolutely.
what do you
Harvey,
do?
thank you for that. Thank you for that question. So it's two sides to that. I'm going to try my best to answer. One, when you think about public education, a quality education is not a privilege, it's a right. And we should be ensuring that everyone has access to it. In the part of the region I represent, I have roughly 11 public school districts, and I saw State Representative Marlene Terry on there. She was someone who's very involved in our public schools. She represents a part of North St. Louis County within my Senate district. And we've had this conversation. First, it starts with the state upholding its financial commitment to fully funding education. And again, serving as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I remain committed to ensuring that the state does everything it can to fully fund public education and provide resources that would enable opportunities towards quality childhood, early childhood education. I think we really tend to overlook things like the social determinants of health. So many things that impact young people, where they live, the environments they live in, that ultimately determines their life expectancy and their ability to learn. That's before you even talk about the fact that we need to figure out how to pay teachers more, and we need to figure out how to provide them with resources like mental health services to be able to address the challenges that teachers see every day with our students. I represent some of the wealthiest communities in this state, like Clayton and Ladue and Parton University City, and then also represent some poverty-stricken ones like Ferguson, where I grew up, Jennings and Hazelwood, and so I have so many different communities, and the scope of the school districts and the quality of education is unprecedented. So to see that inequity, I think first starting with the foundation, making sure that schools get the proper funding they need, creating opportunities and programs to address mental health services, making early childhood education the keystone to education, public education, and then putting young people on a trajectory to be able to have access to whatever they choose. And I think there also needs to be a different conversation. When you think about the skilled trades, right now, we have so many folks who graduate from high school with the notion that they should go to college, but have no desire to. Let's put them on a trajectory to be able to go into a trade or be an entrepreneur and not go into college debt pursuing a program that they have no desire to. And then those who do want to go to college, we need to put them on a pathway to be able to go to college and have access to a quality education, and it not create an environment where them or their families are financially insecure.
Phyllis, Marcus, do you have?
I think Harvey had one more
Oh,
follow-up.
I'm sorry. Okay, Harvey first. Thank you.
Just a reminder, as a pediatric neurologist, I'm very well aware of the tremendously detrimental effect of undernutrition, particularly in the first 3 or 4 years of life. And what are we doing to try to ensure that our students have, if you will, free lunches as they do during the school year, but our preschoolers also and our early childhood children do not suffer the lifelong effects of early nutritional deprivation in those communities that are afflicted with poverty?
Absolutely. So I've been going around visiting early childhood education centers and talking to experts about how are we ensuring that there's a healthy, balanced meal for young people, and they become exposed as well as engaging their families around healthy eating options, as well as exposing them to what those options are. And I think it's going to be really important that we leverage a lot of this funding that we have coming into the state to create programs where we're providing healthy food options. It goes back to that project that I was talking about at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Right there in that Normandy area, you can't go anywhere and get a healthy food option within 5 to 10 miles each direction. So to put a healthy grocery store option in what we would consider an area that's by the by statistically has been considered by the FDA a food desert and a place you would consider insecure when it comes to access to quality food. So, you know, we have to start with that conversation. And again, I cannot reiterate with the unprecedented number of funding that we have coming to the state, we need to really think outside of the box, and we need to really invest in our region. And let's be clear about this. I tell my colleagues all the time, outside of the St. Louis region, if the city of St. Louis does well, the entire state of Missouri succeeds. It is the economic driver in our state, so we should be doing everything we possibly can to invest in the St. Louis region if we want to see things like public safety get better, if we want to see our education system thriving, and if we want to see model citizens put in a position to be able to be successful by having the resources that they deserve, and they're not being provided for that small fraction of people who have access to it or the financial means.
Phyllis Marcus had her hand up. Then we have a couple comments, questions in the chat box. So Phyllis, would you like to go ahead?
Senator Williams, thank you so much. My name is Phyllis Marcus and I'm chair of the Newmark Institute, and we're so delighted to have you here today. And really my question echoed a lot of what Harvey had to say about early childhood and what you said. And I'm so delighted to hear what you say, because as Harvey pointed out, those first critical years are when all the circuits in the brain are connecting. And if in fact children don't have the opportunity to get good stimulation, good nutrition, to not be in trauma, then that spoils really the rest of their lives. It affects the rest of their lives. And there's a direct correlation between that early childhood period and later incarceration. So if we can nip it early, we're going to be in much better place. And I just wonder if there's any legislation that you're looking at that would affect early childhood education and providing that resource to our community.
Yeah, so Phyllis, good to see you, and thank you for the work.
Nice to see you.
So I don't know if this is necessarily a form of legislation. Again, I think the state has done a terrible job of investing in these areas. And I think we need to use, again, this unprecedented amount of funding to really steer towards programs and providing the funding opportunities that we need to be able to address these inequities. I mean, we understand exactly what the challenges are, but we have yet, this is the first time our state has been forced to acknowledge that we have the resources. And I think this pandemic has really exposed our country for its shortcomings, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about access to quality healthcare, or you're just talking about the fact that we live in a society that has really made a small percentage of our country a priority. So I think this is going to come down to investing the resources. I think there's been several studies and countless numbers of folks who have brought data to the table. as a board member for a community health center, I took the lead to build a behavioral health facility through People's Health Center, the first of its kind for children. And, to think about the social determinants and even as an adult, a functioning adult, to take the ACE test and still see that there are some levels of trauma that functioning, educated adults are still experiencing is very, very concerning. And I'm confident that all started from their birth.
We have a comment by Ruth Banks. As an educator, I appreciate your position on CRT. Please do not hinder our schools from teaching the facts regarding history, everyone's history.
Right. And
that
if you
was-
look in the chat, Rob, from my staff, he put in a bill that I filed, which would also provide the opportunities for schools to teach students the history of the Holocaust. That is one example of how we have really moved forward and either ignored or created opportunities to erase history that have led to high levels of discrimination. And we've seen it happen in the Black community when it comes to history, where folks are pretending that things like slavery never happened, wanting to do away with things like the 1619 Project, and now the Holocaust, to pretend that that did not happen. So educating our children on the history, and again, as James Baldwin said, understanding from whence we came. I think that puts us on a path to understand how far and that there are no limitations to where we can go.
Matt, had your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Senator Williams, I had a quick question along the lines of education. It seems like within our state, there's been in recent, with regard to CRT, with regard to mask mandates, there's been an attack on the autonomy of local school districts to decide what they need to do and what's best for their communities. Is there any legislation in the works to guarantee that autonomy and guarantee that districts can do what's best for their children?
Yeah, great question, Matt. And Matt does the really hard work. He serves as a director on the Board of Education in University City School District. Thank you for what you do. Matt, I think that we should be focusing on nothing infringes on that. And I'm a firm believer in local control. I think we need to allow our school districts and our educators and our school boards to make decisions that are adequate and sufficient for the circumstances and situations that school districts deal with. I am currently at odds with our Attorney General, who has really made it very difficult for schools to move forward, whether they're responding to sunshine requests to determine whether or not you teach critical race theory, or having to the state infringe on whether or not students should or should not wear masks during a health pandemic. I think we need to really stay out of the business of our experts and our educators, whether it's science or educating our children, and trust you all to be able to make the right decisions. So I will not support any legislation that infringes on that, and I would always be in support of anything. And I don't think it's really necessary that we file legislation to say that the state's empowering you to do your job. I think we need to just stay out of the way and not let legislation that would infringe on that go to the governor's desk.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Philip Deitch, do you have a question next?
Do. Senator, other than getting to photograph you so often at progressive events, one of the other hats I wear in the community currently is I'm president of the St. Louis LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. And when you talk about all the money that's coming into the state, how can a minority chamber like ours, in conjunction with the Hispanic Chamber, the Women's Chamber, the Black Chamber, the Asian American Chamber, all have some input into how that money gets distributed and used?
Yeah, that's a great question, Philip, and good to see you. Thank you for what you do. First, my first year in the Missouri Senate, one of the top pieces of legislation that I filed as a straight Black male was Mona, which was to not allow Missouri to be a state that discriminated against anyone because of their sexual identity or orientation. So I'm proud to stand with the LGBTQIA community and then do everything I can to protect it. You know, as they say, discrimination against anyone is discrimination on everyone. So I think we have opportunities to be able to work with organizations. I think it goes back, Philip, to the education. We have to educate our community and our country on the importance of not only these organizations, but why we should not be allowing discriminatory practices to go into law or even be a conversation. So I think that's one way. I'm open to ideas that you may have or the chamber may have, and clearly as an ally, that's something I love for my office to work with you on. But I don't know if there has been anything particular off the top of my head from a resource standpoint. But as Rob stated in the chat, I'd love to connect you with the Missouri Chamber of Commerce to continue to make statewide connections. And one thing that we've done around a lot of these issues, especially social issues, is really encourage and have a direct conversation with the business community. And that's one thing I think is really important, is that the business community really show that they're committed partners in this fight as well. So let's follow up and circle back and figure out ways we can move forward.
Good.
I'm going to go back to a chat question first, and then Michael had his hand up. Luz Rooney had, Senator Williams, what can be done to prevent misinformation targeted to African Americans to keep them away from the voting polls?
Oh man, a lot. And keep in mind, these are great questions. And you know, I'm not one of those elected officials that pretend to know everything or act as if I know everything. I don't think that's a requirement to be a state senator or any elected official. So if I don't know the answer, I hope you're okay with me getting back with you and after I do some research. But with that one, I think there's a lot of things that we can do. One, first, we need to encourage folks and remind them the importance of voting and participating in the first place. That is I think that serves as the keystone to anything. And then also reminding folks that, you know, this narrative that your vote don't count, or this thing where you're moving polling locations around and folks don't have access to information on where their polling location is. And then it goes back to what I spoke on earlier when it comes to voting rights. You know, last year, when we had our first election during the pandemic, you know, I had colleagues that wanted to require all of these documents for someone to be able to vote. And they wanted to provide photo ID language, but we were able to remove that, but they still ended up wanting to go forward with a notary. So to think that you would have had to have your ballot notarized to be able to submit an absentee ballot just to protect yourself from potentially being exposed to COVID-19, we should not be creating those barriers. We should be doing everything we can to eliminate them. So moving forward, I think we should have things like no excuse absentee voting. We should have everyone should be able to go to really any polling location and vote. And then I think we shouldn't require all of these unnecessary documents to be able to vote. We've seen throughout this country, even with the mess that happened in Georgia, there has never been proven to be any case of election fraud. And I can tell you right now, I have never had anyone run into the polls volunteering to vote for me. So we really need to educate folks on the importance of voting, and then we need to make sure we eliminate any barriers there are to prevent people from voting. And last but not least, we need to figure out a way for folks to be able to vote safely and not have to worry about a barrier or potentially putting them in danger of contracting COVID-19 in the process.
Michael, you have your hand up.
I do. And thank you very much, Senator, for being here today. The other day, I received a email with the House's representatives about 50 bills going to committee. And I reviewed them somewhat rather quickly. However, I noticed that almost none of them promote the things that you in your introduction would want to see happen. It's really frightening. So as a very minority person in the Senate, with all the good things you want to see get done, and that I think the majority of people on this Zoom would agree with, how do you go home at night knowing that so little will probably get done? Or do you have some great inspiration or hope or whatever?
That's a great question, Michael.
Tell us about it, how you feel after you leave one of these sessions.
Yeah, well, I can tell you what, I go home with my head up high because I know every day I fight for issues and I keep you and everyone else in this state that I may or may not represent, even those that didn't vote for me, in mind. And then secondly, you know, I do have a lot of hope. You know, when I was elected in 2018, I went to the Missouri Senate in 2019. And I was, again, elected the first Black male in 2 decades to serve there. And within 2 years of being there, and this is a funny story with Cheryl being on the line, you know, I took on issues like police reform, criminal justice reform, and to think in a super minority, in a super majority Republican legislature, I was able to work in a bipartisan way to pass sweeping police and criminal justice reform that led to Kevin Strickland being removed from prison after being there for 43 years for a crime he didn't commit, to have one of the strongest use of force databases in the country, to even go as far as changing the expungement law, or even providing sanitation products for women incarcerated in prison facilities, which is crazy to think today they didn't have access to them. So I'm very optimistic. How did I do that? One is people far less fortunate than me who get up every day and work with people they don't like, and they still got to get their job done or they get fired. So with that particular piece of legislation, we got it done because I identified something that was important to the Republicans, and I told them if they wanted that to move forward, they need to move forward with some progressive things that I had. And we wrote it together in what's called a Senate committee substitute, which meant if my bill died, their bill died. If they bill moved forward, mine moved forward. And the compromise on that was that they got to expand the residency requirement in the city of Kansas City from to 30 miles outside of the police department, from the police department location. That was the compromise. So what I do is I identify things that are important that do not infringe on my values, and we work together to try to get those things across the finish line. In St. Louis County, where I live and represent, we don't have a police department residency requirement. But I felt to be able to ensure that Black Lives Matter in the state of Missouri, to be able to pass ultimately Missouri's version of the George Floyd Policing Act is very, very inspirational. I think it was nothing short of a higher power and my grandmother praying every night for me. But some people say that it was just hard work and working across party lines to get something done for our state.
Thank you. And we thank you for your
and that's Senate
hard
bill,
work.
Senate Bill 60, if you want to look up and see what's all in that bill. It's a really good bill. And again, you know, we spent a year traveling all over the state to get this done. So I met with members of law enforcement. Clearly, we had the ACLU involved and various activists. And that was the first time they had ever been brought to the table to have a serious conversation. And one thing I made very clear to them is that this isn't an us versus them situation. This is about tackling a subculture of bad police officers that have tainted what should be considered an honorable profession. And when it comes down to why this is important to me, I think every single day, if I was to take off this lapel pin here, I would be no different than George Floyd. And that was something that stayed with me throughout the entire process.
Thank you, Senator. Marilyn Pittler has made a comment earlier on, but I want to read it to you. So proud to be with all of you today. And as an FYI, Senator Williams is hosting a virtual lobby day on January 19th, 1 p.m. in honor of Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So, and she gave a registration link. So that's just an informational piece, but thank you again. And do we have some more questions right now?
I need to give a shout out to my friends. You know, I was proud to support the Crown Act as well.
Oh, I missed that one. Good. Thank you so much. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
it basically was just creating a respectful and open world for people with natural hair.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you,
That
Ruth.
helps
And
with the students not being discriminated against because of how they look.
so at this point, do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing anyone with questions. And I would like to also acknowledge Phyllis Marcus, who is the chair of the JCRC today of the Newmark Institute. And did you want to say a few things as well, Phyllis?
Sure, thank you. Give me just a sec. Thank you so much, Senator. That was inspiring, and I think gives us all hope about what could be our future. As Judith said, my name is Phyllis Marcus, and I'm chair of the Michael and Barbara Newmark Institute for Human Relations at the JCRC. The Newmark Institute is committed to the concept of a pluralistic society. Our work brings together diverse religious, racial, and ethnic groups to work together to build bridges, and in doing so, to enhance the community we live and work in. This is, of course, the message of Dr. King. I can think of no greater tribute to the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. than the inspiring words and work of Senator Williams. We thank you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and for galvanizing us. We are so grateful for what you do in the Missouri State Senate and so proud to have you as a staunch ally of our Jewish community, especially as you've stood alongside us so many times in the past year to fight against anti-Semitism. And I hope everyone saw Cheryl Edelstein's comment in the chat that you have been exemplary in working across party lines and accomplishing so much. And thank you to Judith Oliver, Joan Dennison, and the Merowitz Center at Covenant Place for organizing the program today. It's always a pleasure to partner and collaborate with you. And most of all, thanks to all of you who have attended today and come together to honor the legacy of Martin Luther King. Dr. King, whose words still resonate today, said, "It may well be that we have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people," which gives us pause because it reminds us how important it is not to be silent, to stand up, to make ourselves heard, to get in touch with our congressmen and congresswomen, to let them know what we're thinking and how important we think these issues are. And I'll leave you with one of Dr. King's most memorable quotes: "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And we have to hold on to that thought. Our work is not yet completed, but our world continues to move closer to justice, and together, I know we can continue to bend that arc. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I wish you a good afternoon. And we really appreciate everything. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you so much. And everyone take care and be safe.
Thank you, Senator, very much.
Thank you, Harvey. Take care.
Thank you.
Good talk.